You may be seated. The first question, what has this war accomplished? Because, as I said earlier, 54% of the American people feel like it has accomplished nothing. Since 9/11, President Bush's objective has been to carry the fight to a worldwide terrorist organization that was responsible for the massacre of 3,000 Americans at the Twin Towers in New York and the Pentagon. The fact is, by carrying the fight to the terrorists on their soil, it has prevented us from having to fight the terrorists on American soil. I want you to understand that as the absolute truth. The objective of terrorism is this: to kill one in a gruesome fashion, as in the beheading of a person, to terrify a million. To kill one and to terrify a million. The fact is that the terrorists were shocked by America's military response to the 9/11 attack in New York. In 1993, when they bombed the Twin Towers in New York, America did nothing. When the terrorists attacked the USS Cole, that was our naval ship, and blew a hole in the side of it big enough to drive a semi-truck through it and killed 27 U.S. service personnel, America did nothing. When terrorists blew up our embassy in Africa in 1998, we did nothing. The Clinton administration sent a very clear signal to the terrorists of the world: we're not going to fight you. Military budgets had been stripped to the bone. America had the profile to the terrorists and around the world as being a paper tiger. America's refusal to respond to these terrorist attacks in the 90s led to 9/11, and don't you ever forget that. The response of President Bush was a shock to the international terrorist. America's president said, "You're either for the terrorist or you're for us." He had a poster that said, "Wanted, dead or alive." You call that moral clarity. He drew the line in the sand and said, the only thing we're after is absolute victory. And America had not heard that for a long, long time out of the White House. So positive result number one is that the terrorists are on the run. That's not my opinion. The 9/11 Commission from Washington, D.C., which is a group of leaders from both sides of the aisle, put a report together about this war. And at the end of staff statement number 15, for those of you who would like to follow it up in Washington, quote, "The Bush administration's war on terror has severely impaired al-Qaeda's ability to organize another attack on America." How? By capturing or killing their key leaders. 2, by drying up their financial resources. 3, severely limiting their ability to strategize, plan attacks, and dispatch operatives around the world, end of quote. Translation, the terrorists are on the run. Are you reading that in the media? No, but you should be. Why? Because the liberal media in America, and I'm not calling them liberal, they call themselves liberal. The media put out a book on themselves. It's called The Media on the Media, if you care to read it. And they said 87% of us do not attend church or seldom attend church. So they call themselves liberal, and they took a position early on that George Bush was wrong in this war, and now they cannot report anything that makes him to appear right because they're the ones who will have egg on their face. Positive result number 2, Saddam Hussein and his rape rooms, his torture chambers, the man who murdered 5,000 Kurds, which were his own people, with weapons of mass destruction, who gave $25,000 to any family who would have a child strap a bomb around their chest and go into a crowd of Jews to murder them in Israel. That man, Saddam Hussein, is now in jail on his way to trial, and by the grace of God will be hung by the neck by the Iraqi government until he's dead. That's a good result in this war. thirdly, the world is a better place because our president took bold and decisive action in spite of the UN, in spite of the French, in spite of the Russians, in spite of the German opposition, all who were in bed with Iraq making millions of dollars when they pledged not to. But now our president is being hammered for going into Iraq because after months of searching, we have not been able to find weapons of mass destruction. Let me set the record straight for those of you who have a short memory. Look at the facts of the case and not the propaganda films by Michael Moore and Hollywood's far radical left. The fact is that Saddam Hussein was so close to having a nuclear bomb in the early 80s that the Israeli Air Force bombed his nuclear plant and put him out of business. The world owes Israel a debt of gratitude for taking nuclear weapons away from Saddam Hussein. Fact for all Americans who have such a short memory, in the 90s, the Clinton administration said Saddam Hussein has weapons of mass destruction. Fact, the CIA told the president it's a slam dunk. Saddam Hussein has weapons of mass destruction. Fact, the British and Russian intelligence sources said Saddam has weapons of mass destruction. The fact that Israeli intelligence said Saddam moved weapons of mass destruction just before America invaded Iraq. So here we are at 9/11. 3,000 Americans have just been murdered in New York, and an attack has been made on Washington, D.C. Not since the British burned the White House in 1812 had America been so violated on its own soil. What was the president to do? Either he could take the word of a madman, Saddam Hussein, who had murdered thousands of his own people, or he could defend America. He chose to defend America, ladies and gentlemen, and our president made the right choice. He did not lie. He acted on the information he had the best way he knew how. Question 2, what is this war in Iraq really about? This war is not about Iraq. No, no, and no. This war is about who's going to rule the Islamic world. This war is about who's going to rule the Middle East. And in the minds of the Yahidis, those who are preaching holy war, who's going to rule the world. This war is about the survival of Western civilization. That's for certain. It's not going to be over in a few months. It will last for years. And listen to me, America, without an absolute determination to win this war, we can lose this war. Why does it involve the whole Middle East? Iran, and for those of you who are weak in geography, that's the nation just across from Iraq. Ancient Persia. Iran cannot allow democracy to survive in Iraq. I have received information that Iran has sent 12,000 highly trained terrorists into Iraq to fight U.S. Marines. Why? Because if freedom survives in Iraq, the religious dictators in Iran are finished. U.S. intelligence reveals that France is helping Iran fight U.S. troops in Iraq. And that's not all. Syria is also sending trained troops to fight Marines in Iraq. And Syrian troops are being found with Russian weapons. So all the Middle East is sending people into Iraq to fight our people. Why? Because they know if democracy gets a foothold, they will never have the opportunity to rule the world. You're not reading that in the American media, but you should be. Iran is on the verge of nuclear weapons. Former Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, sat in my office and told me personally that Russian scientists are helping Iran develop long-range atomic missiles that can hit London, Jerusalem, and New York. And no one in the world doubts they will use those weapons when they get them. Now the world is asking, will Israel sit by and let this happen, or will they bomb Iran's nuclear plants like they did in the early 80s when they bombed Iraq?